Kofi Mensah was not just a man, he was an institution. The wealthiest man in Africa, his name carried weight in boardrooms, in the halls of power, and in the hushed conversations of those who envied his success. His fortune had been built over decades, stemming from industries as diverse as oil, real estate, and technology. His mansion, a sprawling palace of marble and glass, stood as a testament to his power. Servants moved about with silent efficiency, fulfilling his every whim. Among them were Mia and her daughter, Dona. Mia had worked in Kofi's household for over a decade, a steadfast presence who managed the affairs of the mansion with precision and grace. She was respected among the staff, known for her diligence and wisdom. She had raised Dona single-handedly, instilling in her the values of hard work and integrity. Dona had recently begun working alongside her mother, assisting in the grand house. Though young, she carried herself with an air of quiet determination. She had dreams that stretched beyond the mansion's golden walls. She had always envisioned a future where she could build something of her own, something not tied to servitude. But reality had other plans, and for now, she helped her mother, earning her keep as they lived in the servants' quarters of Kofi's vast estate. She was striking in a way that did not demand attention but rather commanded it effortlessly. Her intelligence shone through in her eyes, and there was a quiet elegance in her mannerisms. Kofi noticed. At first, his interest was barely perceptible. A lingering glance, a small smile. He would make casual remarks about how hard she worked, about how different she was from the rest. It started with compliments, harmless words spoken in passing. "You are too intelligent to be working here," he once told her as she served him tea in his private study. "A mind like yours deserves more." Dona, flattered but cautious, only smiled politely. She had grown up watching men like Kofi, powerful, rich, and accustomed to getting what they wanted. Her mother had warned her many times about the dangers of trusting men in positions of power. Yet, Kofi was different. Or so she thought. As time passed, his gestures became bolder. He would find excuses to be around her, asking for things that didn't necessarily require her assistance. If he wanted a drink, he would ask for her to bring it, even if another servant was closer. If he needed something signed, he would call her to the study, knowing she had no role in such affairs. Then came the gifts. At first, they were small, an elegant bracelet left on a silver tray where she would find it, a book on philosophy with a handwritten note inside. Then, the gifts became more extravagant. A silk dress. A pair of gold earrings. "For you," he would say with a smile, dismissing any protests with a wave of his hand. "It's nothing. Just a small token." Dona felt a whirlwind of emotions. She had grown up with very little, and now, here was a man who seemed to see her, who valued her in a way she had never been valued before. Was it wrong to enjoy the attention? Was it wrong to let herself dream, just for a moment, that life could be different? Her mother noticed. "Stay away from him, Dona," Mia warned one evening as they prepared dinner in the staff kitchen. "Men like Kofi don't love. They take. And when they are done, they leave." Dona hesitated. "But he's kind to me, Mama. He says I have potential. That I could have more." Mia's face hardened. "You don't need his gifts. You don't need his words. You are strong on your own. Don't let him make you forget that." But it was already too late. Kofi's charm was intoxicating. His words wove dreams that Dona found herself wanting to believe in. He spoke of a life where she wouldn't have to work, where she could have all the opportunities she had never imagined. And then, one evening, under the soft glow of golden chandeliers, it happened. The night was warm, and the air carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the mansion's vast gardens. Kofi had requested Dona to bring him wine in his private quarters. She hesitated, but duty called. As she entered the room, she found him seated near the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The city lights shimmered in the distance, reflecting against the polished marble floors. "Sit with me, Dona," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Just for a moment." She hesitated. "Sir, I should." Kofi, he interrupted gently. Not sir. Just Kofi. She sat. He spoke to her as if she were an equal, as if she were more than just a servant. He told her about his life, about how wealth had never truly brought him happiness. He made her feel special, as though she were the only person in the world who understood him. And then, he leaned in. A touch. A whisper. A promise. Donna, lost in the moment, let herself believe it was real. That she was different. That maybe, just maybe, Kofi saw her for who she truly was. The world outside that room faded. All that existed was the warmth of his touch, the softness of his words. But what felt like love to her was nothing more than a fleeting indulgence for him. As the days passed, Kofi's attentions remained, but there was something different in his eyes now. A satisfaction, perhaps. The thrill of the chase had been won, and now, the game had changed. Donna did not yet realize it, but the dream she had been sold was already beginning to crumble. And soon, she would face the harsh reality of what it meant to trust a man like Kofi Mensah. Donna's world shattered the moment she saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope, her mind racing with endless possibilities of what this could mean for her future. At first, uncertainty gripped her. This was not something she had planned, nor was it something she had ever truly imagined happening at this stage in her life, but in the chaos of her emotions, hope began to take root. Surely, Kofi, the man she had fallen so deeply in love with, the man who had whispered sweet promises into her ear during the quiet nights they spent together, would stand by her side. They had shared laughter, stolen moments, and passionate confessions, and she had believed, truly believed, that there was something real between them. So, with trembling hands and a heart filled with fragile optimism, she gathered the courage to tell him, to share the life-altering news that she was carrying his child. But nothing could have prepared her for his reaction. Cold and distant, Kofi leaned back in his luxurious leather chair, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass with the same detached indifference one might have for an uninvited guest overstaying their welcome. His voice was devoid of warmth, of affection, of any trace of the man she thought she knew. This was never meant to be serious, he said, each word slicing through her like a blade, the finality in his tone suffocating the last flicker of hope she had held on to. He took a slow sip of his expensive whiskey, his posture relaxed, utterly unbothered, as if the weight of the world had not just come crashing down upon her shoulders. The same man who once held her close, who once traced gentle patterns along her skin as he spoke of futures that now seemed like cruel illusions, was looking at her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience, a mistake he was eager to erase. For a moment, the air around her grew suffocating, the walls of his grand estate closing in, her breath hitching as reality dawned upon her. He did not love her, he never truly had. The warmth she had felt in his embrace had been a fleeting illusion, and now that she was standing before him, vulnerable and in need of his support, he discarded her as easily as one might discard an empty glass. Her heart, once so full of love and trust, shattered into irreparable pieces. Before she could even process the depth of her pain, before the shock could fully take hold, Mia stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with fury, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Loyal and protective, Mia had always been the voice of reason, the one who had warned Donna to be careful, the one who had silently watched as her friend fell deeper into the arms of a man she had never quite trusted. And now, seeing the devastation written across Donna's face, she could no longer hold back her anger. "How dare you," she spat, her voice shaking with barely restrained rage. "She gave you everything, and this is how you treat her?" But Kofi, unbothered, merely sighed, his lips curving into a smirk that only deepened the wound. "I never promised her anything," he said, his dismissive tone like gasoline to Mia's fury. "This is her problem, not mine." His words were the final blow, the undeniable truth that shattered any remaining illusion Donna had clung to. He would not change his mind. He would not suddenly realize his mistake and beg for forgiveness. He was done with her. With them. The realization was a heavy, crushing force pressing down on her chest, and she could not stand to be in that room, in that house, in his presence, for even a second longer. With nowhere else to go, with the painful truth seared into her very soul, she turned on her heel, her mother's comforting but firm grip on her arm guiding her away. Together, they left the mansion that very night, the place that had once held laughter and love now nothing more than a monument to her heartbreak. As she stepped out into the world beyond its gates, the cold air stung her skin, a harsh reminder of the reality she now faced. The world outside was unforgiving, indifferent to her pain, just as Kofi had been. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily upon her, settling in her bones, threatening to consume her whole. But even as the tears blurred her vision, even as her heart ached with unbearable sorrow, one truth remained: she would not break. She could not break. Because now, more than ever, she was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the life growing inside her, for the future she would build without him, for the strength she would find in the ruins of what once was. Life outside Kofi's luxurious world was unforgiving, a stark contrast to the sheltered existence Donna had once known, where soft carpets muffled her steps and crystal chandeliers bathed the halls in golden light. Now, the reality she faced was brutal, indifferent to her pain, offering no sympathy for the broken heart she carried or the new life growing inside her. The weight of betrayal clung to her like an iron shackle, a constant reminder of the man who had cast her aside without a second thought, but there was no time to dwell on heartbreak, not when survival demanded every ounce of her strength. The world outside the mansion did not wait for grief to pass, it did not offer comfort or understanding. Instead, it met her with rejection at every turn. Employers took one look at her growing belly and dismissed her without hesitation. She was too much of a liability, too much of a burden, and though she pleaded, though she tried to prove her worth, the doors remained closed. Jobs were scarce, and money was tighter than ever, the cruel reality of financial struggle weighing down on her shoulders as she stretched every last coin to afford food, shelter, and the bare essentials for the child she was about to bring into the world. Nights were long and restless, not just because of the discomfort of pregnancy but because of the anxiety that gnawed at her, the fear of not being enough, of not being able to provide, of failing before she even had a chance to start. But despite the overwhelming odds, despite the exhaustion that threatened to break her spirit, she refused to let despair consume her. She had already lost too much, she would not lose herself too. Mia remained her rock, her unwavering source of strength in a world that had suddenly turned so cold. While others turned their backs, Mia stood firm, offering not just words of encouragement but tangible support, helping her search for jobs, sharing whatever little money she had, making sure Donna never felt alone, even in her darkest moments. It was with Mia's encouragement that Donna swallowed her pride and took on whatever work she could find. She cleaned houses, scrubbing floors until her hands ached and her knees burned from hours of labor. She waited tables, enduring long shifts where rude customers treated her like she was invisible or, worse, disposable. She worked tirelessly, saving every penny, stretching every dollar, learning the art of survival in a way she never had to before. Gone were the silk dresses and lavish dinners, replaced by second-hand clothes and meals carefully rationed to last through the week. But with every hardship, she grew stronger, forging herself into a woman of resilience, unwilling to be broken by the misfortune that had befallen her. Yet, even as she worked herself to the bone, she did not let go of her dreams. The fire inside her, the one that had once burned with ambitions of shaping her own future, refused to be extinguished. She enrolled in night classes, balancing books and bottles, lectures and lullabies, determined to build a better life not just for herself but for the child she had vowed to protect. It was an exhausting, often overwhelming struggle. There were nights when sleep was a luxury she could not afford, when she would finish a long shift only to return home and stay up studying until dawn. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering cruel reminders of how easy it would be to give up, how tempting it would be to surrender to the hardship and accept that life had already beaten her. But every time those thoughts threatened to take root, she reminded herself of why she had chosen this path. She refused to let her child grow up in the shadows of her pain. She refused to let Kofi's abandonment define her. She would not be a woman scorned, a tragic tale of love lost. She would be a mother, a fighter, a woman who reclaimed her destiny with her own hands. Years passed, and though the road had been long and grueling, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had led her to this moment. Standing in front of a classroom full of eager young minds, chalk in hand, Donna realized she had done what once seemed impossible. She had rebuilt herself, not as a victim of her past but as a woman of strength and purpose. Becoming a teacher was more than just a career, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for, a testament to her resilience. She was not just shaping young minds, she was proving to herself that she was capable, that she was worthy, that she had risen above the pain and forged a future that no longer bore the scars of her past. She had turned her suffering into strength, her heartbreak into motivation, and in doing so, she had ensured that neither she nor her child would ever be defined by the man who once left them behind. Looking out at her students, she saw reflections of herself, children with dreams, with fears, with untapped potential, and she vowed to be the guiding light that she had once needed. She had made it, not because life had been kind, not because fate had given her an easy path, but because she had refused to give up. And that, above all else, was her greatest victory. Fate, with its unpredictable and often ironic twists, had brought Kofi back into Donna's life, though not as the confident, untouchable man he once was, not as the one who had once sipped expensive whiskey while dismissing her as an inconvenience. Time had not been kind to him. The empire he had built with arrogance and certainty had crumbled beneath the weight of his own recklessness, and the wealth he had once used as a shield against responsibility was now slipping through his fingers like sand. The world that had once bent to his will, that had given him everything without question, had finally turned its back on him, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and the empty echoes of his past mistakes. He no longer carried the air of superiority that had once defined him. Gone was the untouchable businessman who had once discarded love without a second thought. Now, he stood before Donna not as the man she had once loved but as a shadow of his former self, humbled, worn, stripped of the power and influence that had once made him believe he could walk away from anything without consequence. And yet, the moment his eyes met hers, he knew this was the one thing he could not walk away from, the one mistake that had left an unfillable void in his soul. His voice, once rich with confidence, now trembled with the weight of his guilt, his sorrow, his desperate need for redemption. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue, a confession long overdue. "I abandoned you when you needed me the most. Please, forgive me." He had expected anger, maybe even satisfaction in her gaze, but what he found instead was something far more powerful, unwavering resolve. Donna stood before him, not as the broken, abandoned woman he had once cast aside, but as someone who had risen, who had taken the wreckage of her past and built something indestructible from it. She was no longer the naive girl who had believed in his whispered promises, no longer the woman who had once waited for love to return to her. She had survived without him. She had fought battles he would never understand, endured struggles he would never comprehend, and emerged stronger than he could have ever imagined. And now, here he was, seeking absolution, hoping that an apology could mend what he had destroyed. But as she looked at him, memories surfaced, not of love, but of nights spent in quiet agony, of tears shed in the dark when no one was watching, of hunger, of rejection, of the soul-crushing realization that she had been nothing more than a passing moment in his grand, self-centered life. She remembered the pain, the fear, the endless days of exhaustion as she juggled work, studies, and the child he had abandoned. And yet, as she stood there, facing the man who had once held the power to break her, she felt none of the emotions she had once feared she would feel. No hatred. No lingering sorrow. Only strength. Strength in knowing that she no longer needed him, that she had rewritten her story without him, that she had found happiness and purpose in a life where he had no place. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders, and met his eyes with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "No," she said simply, her voice firm, steady, unshaken. "Some wounds don't heal with an apology." And in that moment, something in Kofi's gaze shifted, the realization that he had truly lost something far more valuable than wealth, something he could never regain, something that no amount of regret could undo. He had thought power was the ultimate currency, that money could replace love, that success could erase the sins of his past. But now, standing before the woman who had once loved him, who had once pleaded for his support, he understood the cruel irony of fate. He had abandoned her when she needed him the most, and now, when he was the one in need, she had nothing left to give him. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the truth, and as he lowered his head, he knew that he could not ask again. There were no second chances here. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps slow, burdened with the knowledge that his greatest failure was not losing his fortune, not watching his empire fall, but realizing too late that the one person who had truly mattered was the one he had thrown away. And as he disappeared from sight, Donna felt nothing but a quiet, steady sense of triumph, not the fleeting satisfaction of revenge, not the bitterness of what could have been, but the deep, unwavering certainty that she had won. She had risen from the ashes he had left behind, rebuilt herself from the wreckage of his betrayal, and found a life richer than anything he could have ever offered. She had not just survived, she had thrived. And that, above all else, was the greatest victory of all.